Welcome to the TRXL podcast. I'm Evan TRXL, and I have a quick announcement before introducing this week's guest. I have a limited number of sponsorship spots available on TRXL for the rest of the year. So if you build software or services for architecture and engineering firms, and if you want to be in front of the people making technology decisions at those firms, this is a great place to put yourself in front of what I consider the best audience in the industry. BIM managers, design technology directors, CIOs, CTOs, you get the idea. Firm leaders evaluating what tools their teams use. The TRXL podcast reaches over 25,000 listeners, and we have a 5+ year track record that's taken this show to the top 3% of all podcasts globally. So if that sounds like a fit, or if you, dear listener, know someone who you think should be sponsoring the podcast, head over or send them to trxl.co/sponsor. Okay, on with the episode. Today, I welcome Pablo Zamorano Mosnaim. Pablo is head of computational design at Heatherwick Studios in London. He grew up in Chile, studied architecture there, and then landed in New York during the mid-2000s boom, working at a major firm until the 2008 financial crisis changed everyone's plans. He used that reset wisely. He moved over to London, got into the Architectural Association's master's program in emergent technologies and design, and came out the other side genuinely transformed. From there, he worked at SOM before joining Heatherwick in 2015, where he started as an architect working on complex geometry and eventually took on leading the studio's formal computational design practice. He's been there ever since. Heatherwick Studio is one of those firms that doesn't fit neatly into any category. Founded by Thomas Heatherwick, the London-based studio of about 260 people is known for work that's visually rich, material-specific, and obsessively detailed at every scale. You may know their projects: Little Island in New York City, The Vessel, Coal Drops Yard in London. The common thread across all of it is a design philosophy that asks how a building, a space, or a surface makes people feel. Not just from a distance, but up close at the scale of a door handle. In this episode, we explore how that design philosophy shapes every technology decision the studio makes. We get into what Heatherwick calls the door scale, the intimate, tactile layer of design where people actually touch and interact with buildings, and why that level of detail demands tools and technology most firms don't even bother with. We talk about the failure modes of parametric tooling for non-specialists, the software choices that run counter to industry norms, and the tools, including AI, that quietly became the most widely used in the studio's history, and why. The conversation kept circling back to a question I find genuinely important right now. As AI and generative tools make it easier and faster to produce buildings, what's actually getting easier? Is it the good stuff or the generic stuff? It's a possibility that the industry is about to face the ultimate ease of producing bad architecture, but there's also the chance that the people who come out ahead will be the ones who pair ambitious ideas with the right tools, not the ones who let the tools define what they make. Pablo also makes a point about learning by doing that I think a lot of people in this profession need to hear, especially those who are still watching all of this from the sidelines. As usual, there's an extensive amount of information in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. You can find it directly in your podcast app if you're a paid supporter of TRXL Plus, and if you're a free member, you can find them over at the website, which is trxl.co. So, without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Pablo Zamorano Mosnaim. Pablo, welcome to the podcast. Great to see you again. This time we're meeting each other from different sides of the planet, but we did get the chance to chat a little bit, and I got to watch your presentation. You got to watch my panel moderation presentation at the AEC Tech Conference in New York City that was put on by Core Studio, Thornton Tomasetti. They keep getting a little bit of, a lot of great meetups happen there, so they keep getting mentioned on the podcast, and they deserve it. It was a great event. So welcome to the podcast, and it's great to see you again.
Thank you, Evan. No, it's a pleasure to be here. And I think it's just very exciting to see, what this conversation is gonna bring, and just a quick note on that event, because to me it was also a really good event to be part of, and I could see the kind of the scale of what we do kind of changing, moving from something that was, it's been always very niche to something potentially quite different, So looking forward to kind of, talking a little bit about that today and more.
Yeah, when I chatted with you last, I mentioned that I got to visit Little Island in New York City for the first time. I think the previous time I was in New York. So I live on the West Coast. I don't get to New York that often, but that project wasn't open yet. I believe it was still under construction the last time I was there. I did get to visit. I've visited the vessel a few times. So Heatherwick projects in New York City. And I think the thing that really stands out to me at those places is just how it encourages people to really look around the corners, like look around, look up, look down, and really check out the details. And Little Island is like a place you get to go explore, right? Like it's kind of ambiguous pathways, different materials, things are changing, there's views that are changing. Sometimes you're oriented out towards the river, sometimes you're oriented back at the city, sometimes you're looking north and south, up and down the island, which is really cool. And then there's all these little kind of moments that happen on that project. And I guess, I was excited to see your presentation also at AEC Tech because you went below the surface of even just the user, the client experience, however you want to frame that, of how did you actually make these projects happen from a technology standpoint. And I guess, I would love to hear your story because that's where I want to spend the meat of the conversation. But let's start with you and how you've got to where you are at Heatherwick Studio.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, well, how did I get here? So my career started in Chile. So I'm from Chile originally. So I went to undergrad school in Santiago, and I graduated, some good time ago. So I think I graduated 2004. And then after that, I got an opportunity to actually go and work at MBBJ in New York, and I said yes, and I moved there. And back then, well, this was kind of right before. It must have been by then. It was probably close to 2007 or something like that. So there was a lot of things happening everywhere. China was kind of exploding. A lot of work there. The work in general, I think, in architecture was getting really exciting. Like these new big players wanted to kind of invest in ideas and were not afraid of exploring new stuff. They were not so attached to kind of things that, I don't know, were kind of usually related to, kind of the Western culture and this sort of, I don't want to say it's like politeness, but maybe it's not even that. It's just they were not afraid to actually embrace the new. So that it was really an exciting time to kind of start your career, I suppose. And but it was also right before the economic crisis hit.
I was going to say, like that timing, it's interesting that you said that. And then you won't believe what happens next, right?
Exactly, and it's so crazy because that happened, and so all of a sudden I was no longer working at the MBPJ, and I was kind of thinking in my future, what am I going to do now, and yeah, so that was a kind of a part of the reason of me kind of ended up in the UK, but mainly because it opened a window to anything. So I was no longer kind of necessarily attached to Chile, which is, an exciting place to practice, but it's also quite far away from everything, And so it opened to me the opportunity to actually look, into other places and around the world. And my partner happened to be from Europe, so we kind of had an easier way into kind of this side of the world, I suppose. But it took us an opportunity, So I applied to kind of some grants and schools here in London, and said like, well, if we are to move somewhere in Europe, London probably is a good place. Well, first because I love the city. Second because it's great for architecture, and maybe our background kind of in New York will help. So yeah, so that's how I ended up kind of here. So I got the grant. I got accepted at the AA. I did the master's in emergent technologies and design at the AA. I'm probably that it's what changed everything in a way, so it really, again, I was no longer kind of, not only kind of open to this kind of new world of exciting opportunities, but also all of a sudden kind of, way more connected to the world of technology, so my career was always focused on design. And even during the master, I think it was also like that. But yeah, I mean, I was always a bit of a geek, and this was just kind of what supercharged that side of me, I suppose. So after that master, I went and worked for SOM, which, in a way, I thought so. The strategic side of kind of going back to school after a few years was, well, having kind of a good base to find a job in London. That's one of the reasons, But funnily enough, I ended up working for a US company, and they hired me not because necessarily my kind of master at the AA. They hired me because I had some experience working on kind of large projects in New York. So it was an interesting kind of move, but that's that was kind of the first place I worked with in London, and stayed there for maybe like 3 years or so, and then I left, and I moved to Heatherwick Studio, where I still am. So that's how I landed here, and then obviously I was not kind of hired as a computational designer. I think back then, so this was 2014, 2015. So yeah, the title kind of computational designer, I'm not sure if it existed here in London, necessarily. I'm not sure, but I was hired I was hired as a deputy project here for one of our projects called Rob's Yard in King's Cross. And yeah, so I was just an architect, so definitely working on the design side of things. But I did have some, good experience looking after kind of complex geometries and advanced modeling, working with BIM models as well, coordinating deliverables, so that really helped into kind of, I would say, building the tech side of me within the studio. Now, it also happened that a few years later, the studio was growing substantially. So the whole studio was kind of growing as a business operation as well, and that requires some kind of strategic changes, and again, new kind of opportunities kind of open. And you are familiar with the kind of the type of projects we do, and we love embracing visual complexity in our projects. We love working with materials and craft and complex geometries, because we believe in the impact these things can have on people and the positive impact they can have. So that meant for us that every single project we work on required an advanced understanding of geometry and an advanced understanding of 3D modeling. And so in a way, we already had kind of a computational designer on each of our projects without kind of putting a name to them, but this was the moment where we decided to kind of go ahead and kind of make a formal group out of this kind of expertise, and I took on leading it. So that's how kind of I ended up in, let's say, my current role.
Yeah. I would love to connect your work. You started off your presentation, I believe, if I recall correctly, talking about the book that was produced from the studio, Humanize, and connecting this idea of visual complexity, materiality to the human experience, I think is super important because you clearly have like, why do we do what we do? It's the why, right? It's like Simon Sinek's Start With Why. The why is all about the way people experience these projects in the built environment. And so I'm really curious. It sounds like you found a really great fit for yourself, and I'm curious like how you connected with that, why that mattered to you. Obviously, you've been at this firm longer than you've been at any other one, so it seems to me like obviously there's some really great projects and there's some great opportunities there, but also I would think, it's the kind of firm that aligns people with purpose in a way that other firms maybe don't. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit and kind of operationalizing, systematizing this idea of visual complexity with human experience, because that's why you're doing that, right? It's not just so that you get to use these cool tools and you get to explore these advanced methods. It's like there's a purpose behind all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely something that is part of the studio. And I guess some firms may have, I don't know, some sort of values or goals they want to achieve, or a way of approaching, design in general. I think Heatherwick Studio has very clear design values, and they operate across any project, across any scale. So it doesn't matter what the brief says. These are our studio design values, and we try to apply them. And in a way, they represent all the things that we've been kind of discussing. So they try to embody kind of the things that we have to care from the design side. When we approach a design problem, with a clear focus on the impact they will have on people. The impact they will kind of, in a way, have in our cities, and in a way how they will kind of help to build culture, while preserving, what is there. So these are very, very important things for us, and in the way we systematize this and or how we connect this then to kind of tools, or the kind of this kind of system mentality in a way. It's about trying to increase the impact we can have, the impact of ideas in a way, So it is 100% tied to the business strategy, because it operates as a whole. This is not one thing or the other, this or two things that run in parallel but never kind of look to each other. I think it's just the way we operate.
Hey everyone, I want to take 30 seconds to talk about something that really matters to me. This podcast exists because I believe this industry deserves better conversations. No agenda, no corporate backing, just honest, in-depth dialogue with the people actually shaping where AEC is headed. More than 25,000 of you listen to this show, and less than 50 of you are direct supporters of what I'm doing. And I'm not saying that to make you feel guilty. I'm saying it because if this kind of independent media matters to you, if these conversations have ever changed how you think or introduced you to someone worth knowing, then the most direct way to keep it going is to become a TRXL Plus member. $12 a month, ad-free episodes, the full Leadership Edge newsletter with my deep dives and the things I don't say on the podcast, and the knowledge that you're one of the people making this possible. Head over to the website at trxl.co and click the join button. And either way, I'm really glad that you're here. Now let's get back to today's conversation. I feel like that there's this common approach, which is to systematize and use technology that further feeds the commoditization of design and architecture, right? It's like we want to go faster, we want to do it, we want to have cheaper labor, we want to, our deadlines are shorter. And there's definitely like that approach, but it sounds to me like you're not saying that at all. You're saying it is totally in service to these greater values of why our studio exists in the first place, which is less as a service operated for, like, you're not just providing architectural services, you are crafting a built environment for the human experience, and the projects really matter. I mean, those are two completely different outlooks. I'm just curious what, obviously you see this too, right? You see a lot of firms adopting technology for the sole purpose of going faster, doing things cheaper versus what you're doing at Heatherwick.
For sure. And don't get me wrong, I think that's also a good thing. Okay. So, I think the economics of productions are important, efficiency is important, obviously. But it does not necessarily need to play against, kind of engaging with your own values, and I think that's where we try to kind of, and we connect these two, even from the design side, so it's not even ourselves trying to say what needs to be done. Our clients are a big part of the process. Engaging with them, it's a key element in getting this, kind of really ambitious ideas realized. So you have to think in a way holistically in order to push for this, this kind of slightly crazier ideas. And that also requires, a kind of a very robust set of kind of tools that, help you to get there. It's, it's always kind of in my mind, this idea of why does people invest so much effort and time to solve, the best car park, like there's such a great amount of money and research that go into solving something that should be computationally very simple, in a way, and really paying attention to that, so this is the greatest thing that ever happened. I mean, something, is like when the first time you see a piece of code kind of doing something for you, you get like, oh my God, it's like, the first time you asked something to ChatGPT and came back to you, put a smile on your face, but that's kind of it, right? So unless you actually take that now tool and use it to do something that has real value, then, it's kind of purposeless. So I always think that if we are to invest a substantial amount of kind of resources in something, it really needs to be kind of targeting something that will increase the value, of whatever effort you're putting in, So, making, kind of increasing the speed, making it more efficient, sure, but to us, I think, trying to, add a next something to the value is more important.
Yeah, so you're really leveraging that technology for that extra, not just the main body of the work. One of the things that's kind of a strong theme in the book, right, is this idea that most architecture is way, way, way too boring. And it's not just like experientially, it's also visually boring, right? Or maybe similar. It's like a copy of a copy of a copy. And that has an impact on the people in a city, just people looking at it, seeing it in the periphery, not even focusing on it, but it also has an impact on people, passersby, who are not directly experiencing it. And again, I kind of come back to that idea of operationalizing technology to do things, right? It's for the purpose of creating more really bland stuff a lot of times. Like it's just keeping the book full of ongoing projects and keeping that backlog and cranking through that stuff versus, again, like a very different approach with your firm. It's like iconic. Obviously, you've set yourself up to be a company that does more iconic design work. And so I'm just curious, like what, because I think you even brought it up in your presentation, like this idea of making architecture really special and focusing on that. And this is where the value of architects lies, rather than kind of this further commoditization of cranking out buildings that are the same as the other buildings all around them.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I mean, there is a lot of kind of scientific kind of backing now of all these ideas. Neuroscientists have spent some time actually thinking about this and writing about this. Why kind of this boring architecture, the flatness basically can affect us really badly. But I was just thinking, I don't know if you ever walk along, let's say, a huge kind of blank wall, that will be kind of a block long or something. It's just really bad. If you compare that with a street, the same kind of length of a street that is very active with, kind of a steel that is broken down, it just automatically becomes better for you. It's just, even if you're not paying attention to it, so yeah, so we were working with this idea of working on a project that can at least keep your attention for the time you walk by past them. That's kind of like a rule of thumb in a way, but it's what we call the door scale. So I think the book talks about 3 scales, kind of the city scale, the building scale, and the door scale. The door scale is very important for us, so that's where you see the textures, the details, the things that you can touch, and things that you can touch, you can remember in a way. We pay, we focus on elements of design that are not traditionally the ones that you will focus on. Lift buttons are really important for us. Things you actually touch, because when you touch something, your body actually, so it's not a visual only kind of memory that you can get. It's also something that you are kind of touching. So it really plays with your senses. So yeah, so we spend time doing these things. Again, going back to the tools, because you touch them, I think they are no longer just geometry; they become material as well.
Mm-hmm.
And from the very beginning, we always try to kind of connect the design tools in some way to either materials or fabrication processes. So there was always kind of a link between how you will make something, and how or what will you make it out of, and then how will you design it and try to combine them. It's inevitable, because when you're working at that scale, you have to prototype, you have to test different ways of actually making this thing, whether you're casting something or not, and then whether you're applying an extra patina on something that you're casting. And so all these things are kind of connected, and that can trace back to, how you model it, whether you 3D model it or you use AI or use, whatever kind of, you pick to get there. But there is a real connection. And when you experience it, that connection kind of, instead of being about kind of a sequence of tools and knowledge, becomes, something experiential, and so that's an area where we really spend time and care in our buildings, the kind of the door scale.
I want to take just a slight editorial digression here, which is I keep seeing tools coming out from companies, companies that have been around a long time, companies that are just starting up, where the tool really shows off how fast and easy it is to make another boring building, right? Like extremely boring, it's like the demos all show that kind of a thing. And do you think that has an effect on our industry from at a root level? I'm starting to feel like it's almost just kind of programming us that that's what architects should do. We should do more of this because it's faster and this and that. And I'm just curious what you guys think about that, or what you think about that, because like the project behind you on the wall is not that at all. Completely different kind of a thing. Like, I can imagine those marketing materials don't impress you guys one bit. That's not even the kind of thing that would raise an eyebrow, like, oh, we should check that out. So I'm just curious, do you feel like software companies are maybe, I get that they're kind of aiming at the 80 or 90% of what architects actually get hired to produce, but at this, because they need scale, they need customers, they need these things, and they're doing that. But I also wonder if it's kind of programming us away from what the true value of architecture is in a more subliminal, subversive way.
It's an interesting question, because there's a side of me that thinks that, I'm not sure if it's their kind of job to incentivize architects to kind of design in one way or another. So a tool is a tool in a way. A good tool will be good enough to be used in any way, So if you have a good idea, you should be able to use that tool and produce an amazing idea, On the other hand, I do remember, kind of the very old versions of tools like Revit, for instance, that used to have kind of an image of a cool project in the starting page,
Like the splash screen, right?
The splash screen. So that was never designed with the actual tool,
Right. Maybe.
But, but it will pick your brain, it will pick your mind and say like, oh, it's cool. I want to do something,
right.
Something interesting with it, must be possible, and then we will discover our tools to actually do it, But so, it's kind of a yes and no. I think it's not their responsibilities, but it's good to see good examples when you approach a tool for the first time. It doesn't hurt.
Something to inspire you, right?
Yeah. But
it doesn't hurt. I like that.
And,
it doesn't
and you
hurt.
think, and we know that, so tools did shape architecture in many ways, the style.
Yes.
So it's really recognizable, a Maya building, a Rhino building, a Revit building, These are things that you can spot easily, and it's because they do have an impact, And you can see clearly, which one has more boring examples and which software have more kind of interesting example, So they're, partly responsible. It's just that I think software, forgot, like I think they wanted to add intelligence into the software and kind of started forgetting about the true meaning of a design software, which is, to enable design as easy as possible, right, to happen. So that bit kind of got lost into this idea of, intelligence, information, sorry. Now it's intelligence, but, it used to be kind of information, and became in a way more important than the design side, for the developers, for the software developers. So, in a way they lost track of the kind of the initial values, I suppose, But, but we are a Rhino-based firm, So our projects start in Rhino, and our Rhino models live, even after we kind of open the buildings, So after the building open, we will still maintain those Rhino models because they are always more detailed than kind of the BIM counterpart, and so we also use Revit for delivery. But our Rhino model will always be more detailed than our BIM model, which is kind of crazy to think,
because it's not the deliverable. It's crazy in that respect, but it's also a better tool for the kind of things that you're talking about, right? So
exactly. There is a world where you design something and then you think in the, things that we were discussing before, material, geometry, fabrication. And this thing can live in a software like Rhino, for instance, very easily, and other softwares, as well. But these things don't live very easily in a software like Revit, for instance, where it's much easier to document something, to generate drawings out of something. But, it makes it slightly difficult to actually work at a scale of production, especially if you're kind of trying to get to operate, kind of digital manufacturing kind of workflows and stuff like that. I mean, forget about it, so the level of precision is impossible to achieve in a package like Revit. But but it's inevitable that, we have to kind of use both, so they serve different things, and the fabrication, the construction industry operates, very differently than the kind of fabrication industry,
right. Different tolerances, different knowledge base, different material science, kind of understanding, all kinds of things. It's a curious thing to me that you're directly choosing to keep both of these models alive, even like you said, beyond like the part of project handover to the occupants, right? And because I think there's a lot of pressure in typical firms to try to, like, it's like a multi-stage rocket, and the old stages that they don't need anymore that got them to that point, it's like just eject those and get rid of them. And what you're saying is we're keeping those stages, and we're then developing them in parallel at some point, for the strengths of each tool, what they're good for.
Yeah.
And I think, like I said, there's a lot of pressure coming inside of firms, maybe operationally, to say, like, no, we actually wish we could do all of design and production in one tool, let alone have like a phased approach. We start in this tool, then we start in this tool, and naturally takes over. So it's just interesting to hear you say that, and I think it just makes a good argument for people out there who are kind of trying to figure that out, but also maybe in their minds potentially set on, we want one tool to rule them all and everything. And you're basically making the argument of why you don't do that.
Yeah. I mean, maybe at some point in my life, I will say the same, one tool to rule them all, as an ideal. But I fundamentally disagree with that, now. I think you need the best tool to the task you need, you don't want to try to eat a soup with a fork,
Yeah.
I mean, it would
Force
be ridiculous.
it to do something it's not meant to do, right?
Yeah, it's just that if you happen to have a spoon or something that, is similar to a spoon, use that, or use your hand and pick the bowl, so it would be easier than using fork. And, sometimes what happens is that you try to force tools that are really, really bad or something, and then just because you decided that you wanted to embrace them, or because you're paying so much money for that, that you have to force it into this other kind of task that it's just not good at. I like to think in a world where we can dig between these tools more easily, so if I want to document something, I can maybe use something that is very lightweight, that is just meant to document, and speaks very well with your kind of design tool. And if you want to do something else, and work with more kind of data, then there is another way to interact with the model from the data side, without living in the same software package, I mean, I think that's how we should be working. We obviously have our kind of workflows in which we deal with these things. We deal with geometry, we deal with data, we deal with kind of drawing production, not only in Rhino and Revit, but in between them, and in connection with other softwares, for visualization or for whatever. So we're constantly dealing with the flow of information and data. I think that's kind of more important in a way than kind of fixating on one specific software package.
Yeah.
I do understand the reality of the market, though. And we are not software agnostic. I wish we were, but we're not in a position to be that yet. We design in Rhino, and we'll do it until we find a better software to do that. And we deliver in Revit. Well, because of many other complexities.
Sure.
Things that can go from kind of contractual reasons to ease of use, or even skills in the market.
Yeah. Right. Let's take a short break from the conversation to invite you to join the most influential technology leaders in the AEC industry at Confluence. Composed of in-person events and a podcast co-hosted by yours truly, Confluence is designed to foster conversations between AEC firms and technology companies so they can learn, share, and engage with each other to support industry innovation. Software company Avail, which creates content management solutions for the AEC industry, started hosting Confluence events in 2019 to understand what firms are needing, wanting, and thinking around technology. To learn more about Confluence, explore upcoming events, and listen to podcast episodes, go to confluence.getavail.com. My thanks to Confluence for supporting this episode of the TRXL podcast. And now, let's get back to the conversation. Well, you mentioned intelligence earlier, and just this idea of being software agnostic. There's an explosion of tools out there. I don't know if you've noticed. And so I'm just curious how that's worked its way into the practice at Heatherwick. And because this is another kind of double-edged sword, right? Like the new tools could be used to further the boring projects, like more and more faster, boring projects. I imagine you're using it in a very different way. I know you're using it in a very different way. And I think something that I want to work into this conversation is just kind of this idea of complexity that you've brought up in the Rhino models versus the construction document, kind of the documentation model, and how these tools now push us to a potential complexity much sooner than they ever have before, and how you're dealing with that. Because a theme that's, and so sorry for going on for so long, but a theme that's come up on the show several times before is this idea of kind of building lightweight models that host more complex things so that the lightweight underlayment is very flexible for as long as possible, right? And I'm curious how you guys maybe approach that, especially when we're thinking about kind of these new tools that can add complexity so quickly to the design process, or at least to the kind of ideation process. So I take that and run with it any direction that you like. But I think there's, I want to definitely address kind of the explosion of new tools. Maybe a lot of AI obviously is just kind of, surrounding this conversation, but your pipeline and how you kind of test new tools and implement them and try them out versus the traditional ways of working,
Sure.
Which I think people are very tied to traditional ways of working because it's a known quantity. We know how fast we can move, but they don't encourage exploration. So we have to kind of balance that in a modern practice.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think so. We do a bit of everything. So the first thing I should mention is that we are, in many ways, when we approach to tools, I think I could say that we're risk takers. So we love exploring new stuff. And so I think we have this a testing mentality, I suppose. We're not afraid of testing new things. So a lot of things happen because of that. So we open ourselves the opportunity to discover new tools or discover new workflows or new processes, new ways to kind of get into designing and modeling. But we also have, a team. We also have, a team of people that are really good at using tools and engaging with new stuff, and that means that we can evaluate them as well against our current processes, and quickly make decisions. Okay, well, we will adopt these tools, for some time and actually run a project with them and then see what happens, and if it's successful, then we will, continue using it. And then we also have a team of people that can produce these tools for us, so if there is something that we really like and maybe open kind of, especially around AI, that, the explosion that happened, for instance, with kind of visualization tools, because the models were kind of so good, were kind of so quickly evolving, everyone kind of jumped in and started using them. And then we quickly realized that, kind of all your intellectual property was at risk, and, private information and so on. So we needed to take control, and we had the resources to actually take on these things and then, work on our own tools to enable these processes to happen. So we have kind of 3 stages in a way. Something that goes from an exploratory level, that can happen within a project, to something very specific and focused, within the kind of the applied research side of things. And is because we care about these things, as a business. It's not only a nice thing to have or something that we believe because it's kind of nice. It's something that we understand is really valuable for what we do, and it's part of the business thinking that we apply to the business itself. So it's really part of what we do. So yeah, and we're constantly changing these things, So how do we approach intelligence, So again, like in the beginning, I was of this idea of we have to push for customization, pure customization, So these tools are available for everyone, all these images, Midjourney, whatever, they become kind of generic very quickly, we have to use these tools to actually help us to visualize our ideas, So it's all about customizing things. Customization takes a long time in AI, So it's not easy to build a good model, And then kind of Stable Diffusion and LoRa's kind of open this quick opportunity to run your own styles and do this kind of things, But then the model wasn't kind of really good quality, And so we needed to kind of evolve, and the kind of I think the strategy changed completely from kind of pure customization to flexibility, to open for as much flexibility as we could, so we could do 2 things: explore every single thing available through our filter of, let's say, safety, so we can curate what we explore, but very quickly, And we also apply some, kind of very streamlined processes to actually allowing ourselves to say, okay, well, we're going to enable this model, this new model, this model, this new model, and then people can use it. And these tools are really successful in the studio, So we can move quickly from kind of testing to, in a way, deployment somehow, at the moment, So I think in the kind of the age of intelligence, I think we managed to find a really good way to react quickly and maybe even kind of explore things even faster than, I don't know, like I have meetings with, people from these large tech companies that work behind these models, and most of the time they get a little kind of surprised when they see the stuff we work on, even from the tool side. So like, I mean, they usually say something, so they usually say, oh, it must be because you're kind of European and people in Europe are, kind of explore more these tools or are more advanced. And it's always so weird because the actual tech companies are not from Europe, right? Are from the US. So, I mean, naturally, I will think the opposite, no? So, this is not San Francisco. This is London.
Right.
So it's surprising that they will think the kind of the innovation it's in a way happening here, So
somewhere else. It's just happening somewhere else.
yeah, exactly.
I think that's just normal human behavior, right? It's like whatever it's the opposite somewhere else, yeah, or better.
Yeah.
The grass is greener. I'm interested in this idea of adoption. And you talked about that these things are really well kind of people get excited about this in the studio. I think that's one of the hardest things in a traditional architecture practice to do, right? Is to actually get people to adopt tools. And obviously now multiple fire hoses of tools are constantly being pushed at us. I mean, and it's overwhelming at many levels. And so I guess, maybe this is a separate question that I would also love to discuss, which is just, at the length and speed at which architectural projects work or go along. How do you have a strategy for taking a look at tools again, because things are changed so fast, right? But so first, let's talk about adoption. Let's talk about kind of the appetite of your staff for new technology, for new tools, and what those can do, because that is a struggle that many firms have. Is there's a lot of great tools, but getting people to actually use them or to get excited about them or to actually implement them on projects is very difficult for most firms.
Yeah. It is something really interesting. So the traditional tools, let's say, a new Rhino plugin. So for instance, we have a pretty good set of tools that let us kind of work with information within Rhino without the need of opening Grasshopper. Maybe I should talk a little bit of how we got here. So
Sure.
It's interesting because I think the computational design approach used to be that, okay, well, how do we open complexity, or enable complexity, working with complexity to other people, Mm-hmm. So, okay, well, the easiest way in is, let's say, with a tool like Grasshopper, for instance. So you don't have to know how to program to actually use it. And then you can very easily kind of work with a model that now is parametric, and you can control values and, add some, from basic to, a pretty substantial level of kind of information to a model. And then, we'll create a bunch of these tools and then apply them across the studio. And they will have like very little use, And the reason is because these tools were ultimately tools for computational designers, not for designers, not for people that didn't know anything about Grasshopper. And the saddest part of this is that computational designers will never reuse a tool. If you open Grasshopper, you go through your kind of whatever problem you wanted to solve, and the next time you have the same problem, you will still start from scratch, because in your mind you think that it will go faster than actually opening something and then remembering how you were using it. So pointless.
Or maybe I'll make it better this time. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I'm way better. Than kind of last month or last year, whatever. So completely pointless. So we realized that very quickly, and we say, hey, we're not going to work on tools for specialists. Okay, we will work on tools for non-specialists. And so from that moment on, we stopped working on things that were inside Grasshopper, and we started working on tools that were, Rhino plugins. Things that any designer could use. They didn't have to know anything about Grasshopper or programming or anything else. It will just kind of nicely see that as part of kind of their design package software, and that was good in some cases, but still, the take-up wasn't like particularly great, and the reason behind that was mainly it's a cultural thing. So it's then you have the real opportunity to say, okay, well, currently you follow this, let's say, workflow to go from, let's say, a sketch to a 3D, okay, or to a sketch to a massing option, to, I don't know, you work on the areas, you extrude them based on kind of the brief telling you the height per program, whatever, stack them together. You kind of arrange them in one particular way, And so that's your current workflow. If I tell you that you can do the same now by sculpting something and then kind of plugging the brief into kind of this package, and then it will kind of suggest where things may go, is a big change in the way they kind of currently do things, you know. So so it feels too sophisticated. It feels like, oh, it's going to be difficult, you know. So you have to first prove it that it's not, you know, and then try to give something that is, let's say, or it seems equally challenging to the brain, so they can find another way to, or another bit to focus on, you know. So yeah, well, I mean, you're not going to spend a lot of time kind of modeling these things, but actually that's a design process, right? So you're understanding the metrics behind your model, you know. Each time you extrude one of these blocks, you know. It's about checking, and checking is actually much more boring for the brain than actually, you know, thinking while you do, you know? Yeah. So these things become kind of, you know, challenging, but once you go through them with designers, you know, and once you make the input to flow easy, then you open yourself kind of an opportunity to success, you know. But it's still, you know, it's never super easy. On the other hand, and I will say kind of these generative models, you know, kind of open this opportunity for us, as for everyone, you know. Language-based models, because they don't require anything else other than actually your language, really helped us to increase the take-up, you know, of these tools, you know, across the studio. It was just too easy, you know, because everyone is used to Google things, you know. So another chatbot, you know, yeah, you know how to talk to it, you know. But if it gives you an amazing result, then, you know, I'm in. And so, yeah. So for instance, our kind of image generation tool, so we have a tool that kind of covers image generation, 3D generation, video generation, is now taking LLMs as well, you know, and it's about to plug into other processes in the studio. And that tool, is our most successful tool ever, you know. So the first month we have it up, I think we were already producing, thousands and thousands of images, you know, per month. And we're about 260 people. So, you know, everyone was using it and using it a lot, you know, and now it's more and more and more, you know. So yeah, I think it's about how easy it is to interact with these kind of things, you know. It didn't disrupt necessarily your kind of traditional workflows. It just kind of completely erased some of them, you know, and gave them to you kind of for free, you know, in the most easy possible way to access them, you know. So, yeah.
This episode is made possible with support from Avail. Is your firm managing architectural, landscape, interiors, and engineering content? Avail's all-in-one content management solution stretches across all disciplines, file types, and content locations, so production teams can find everything they need all in one place. Thanks to Avail's desktop application and Revit, AutoCAD, and Civil 3D plugins, teams can consistently find and reuse all types of content, from specifications and calculations to 3D models and plans. As a result, standards-compliant models and drawings are easier to create, the documentation process is less chaotic, new hires are easier to onboard, and projects are delivered faster with fewer errors. Visit getavail.com to request a demo. That's getavail.com to request a demo. My thanks to Avail for supporting this episode of the TRXL podcast. Now let's get back to the conversation. I'm curious if you could talk about some of the results that you saw from that experimentation and what that maybe did to the culture in the studio. Because I think a lot of this that you're talking about is actual behavior. It's like things that we've done for so long. There's an automatic eye roll when new tools come out. It's like, really? More? Of course, you know, no thanks, right? There's that mentality in many studios. And then there's a different behavior, which I think you cultivated through this process to say, and obviously it shows in your work too, like big ideas, experimentation is very important. And so I'm curious about the behavioral thing, but I'm also curious to kind of hear, like, how surprised were you at some of the results you were seeing, and did that get everybody excited too? And then does that become kind of a self-feeding cycle in the studio for idea generation, for exploration, things like that?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a behavioral thing, so changing behaviors is difficult. And so it's definitely about that. Yeah, I think giving the opportunity to anyone to get excited about something, it's one of the good ways in,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if something, yeah, it gives you a good result quickly, even if it lasts for a little bit, it's like I don't know, it's like drugs a little bit, So, it's you're looking for a hook, and then if that works, oh, amazing, they want more, So, yeah, so I think it's fostering that level of exploration, kind of sandboxing.
Yeah.
But then it's also about kind of the actual tool and what they can actually do for you. I mean, we love to customize things again. So okay, so we have access to all these things, but then what can I do with them? How far can I take them? And then it's about like finding really cool people that is doing really cool things with these tools, and then discovering things. I feel like and I don't know, social media sometimes kind of shows you 2-3 people that are doing crazy things with these tools, and people see this thing and they're like, oh, how are they doing this? How are they doing that? And they're like, well, actually, it's fairly simple, And once they realize how simple it is, then they take it to the next level, and then things are starting to pop, Yeah, I think it's once you get this type of tools into the workflows, they can really have an impact quickly, Yeah, but again, to me, it's essential to add flexibility into these things, because many things will work and many things will not,
Mm-hmm.
and tools are getting better every day, Yeah, I'm honestly, I'm not sure. I mean, we rely on this kind of really old design packages, at the moment. I think that's going to change.
Mm-hmm.
It will change. Yeah. So we're constantly thinking about these things. So we move from kind of tools to purpose, or tools for a purpose to purpose first. Reassessing completely the tools, and workflows, and now kind of injecting this kind of level of, let's say, intelligence, if you like, into the processes, and then reassessing the processes, so that's it's kind of the evolution of this, and I think it will really change things.
Yeah, another way to put that's come up on the show before is kind of aligning the tools with the values, and not the other way around, right? Not letting the tools define the values. And so if you're constantly focused on the values, and then you're always looking at, okay, what are the best tools that we can use to get to that along the way? I mean, you got to put the cart before the horse, or you've got to put the horse out. The horse is the part that you got to focus on. It's got to be out in front. And so like, that's what actually differentiates you as a firm. How you get there could be different on every single project, and it's always in flux. And it's important to constantly, I think, talk about that, to reinforce that in the company. It's like, this stuff is always changing. The values are not, right? And so how we do that, the way we get there, design is a squiggly line. It's not a straight line, right? And so it's cool to hear that. So, kind of bringing this back to this idea of, or the intersection, I guess, of computation and high tech and AI and then human-centered design. If you were to, kind of, what do you think, what do you wish more people came into this profession with when it comes to like that kind of a framing? Is there anything that you could put out there?
Critical thinking, definitely the most important skill, I will be looking for in the new generations.
Especially important right now, right?
I think so. And I think an open mind to rethink, what they can do and how they can do it. I believe the architectural profession it's about to, reshape, and we can say it's constantly reshaping. It's not that true,
Not a lot.
It looks very similar to how it used to look like. I think that that is going to change. That is going to change, and I think we will be faced with, I will say, the ultimate easiness to produce, bad architecture, and so we will need people that can react to that, And I believe we will have the tools to actually do it. So I think we're entering into an era where small teams with the right tools will be able to produce the same amount of, let's say, material that large teams with the wrong tools. And so if a small team has great ideas, they will have a real opportunity to actually realize them. So that sense of purpose, critical thinking, and being ambitious about ideas, I think, and ideals is going to be important, and it's going to be, if we want a better future for our cities, I think it's going to be really necessary.
So how important do you think it's going to be, or is, maybe is a better way to put it, to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty with this stuff now versus watching it from the sidelines? Because like what you just described, small teams being able, big ideas, they're nimble, staying flexible throughout the process, always looking at, experimenting new tools. Like that's a very different mindset from kind of the incumbent version of, this is the way we do things. We have these processes. These are the big team with the wrong software is the way you put it, right? So, yeah. And it's not just about software then, right? It's about the people, it's about the ideas. And so I'm curious, like, I think it's obvious maybe what the answer is, but what do you think the approach should be for people now? Is it to actually get in and use this stuff and figure it out, or is it to watch from the sidelines?
No, I mean, definitely they have to be doing
like
it,
I said, it's obvious.
You learn by doing, there is no other way, whoever is watching these things from the side, they better find something else to do, because, I don't see a real future for them, I think, I think you have to get used at changing the tools you work with, to changing your workflows. You have to feel comfortable in this constantly changing, let's say, world future that, is ahead, because that's going to continue happening, and we will have to readapt very quickly, and I think the new generations will have to readapt more, definitely. definitely. I mean,
Yeah, I think the old example was, well, it didn't matter that I didn't adopt Revit, for example, right when, 2007 to 2009, because I just picked it up later. But that was just the new version of the old model of we
yeah,
make drawings on paper, right? And so what you're talking about is a fundamental shift in the profession of architecture. And to me, that's the reason why you have to get involved in this experimentation and understanding, because and another reason, another layer in there, is that things are changing so fast. If you don't know how to use what there is today and then the new version and then you're not constantly keeping up with that.
yeah,
I mean, I hate to say it, like it is kind of a vicious treadmill that you have to get on of constant moving, but you do become accustomed to it at some level and you do get more comfortable with it. And that's the point, is actually just to get comfortable with that so that you can constantly be applying that thinking to, is this changing the way I practice? Is this changing the outcomes? Is this, and you can constantly be in that conversation rather than just waiting for that conversation to be applied to you, the answer to that conversation to be applied to you, in which case you're probably not going to be employable at some point if you just hang with the old model.
yeah, absolutely. But I'm very hopeful of the new generations. I do believe that kind of these new generations are kind of, they are generation in AI in a way.
Mm.
I think older generations can be more afraid of change. They were born, the new ones were born with this, and it's just, hopefully it's just second nature. That's why I think it's really important for them to be conscious about what these things do, and how they can use them in the right way. I think critical thinking is just going to be really important, because the access to these tools is actually going to be very easy, but you will have to learn where to look at, and when to look at these things, and the results and the processes, that these things, kind of go through. And that takes time.
Yeah.
So, for us, it's very easy to spot, what's being generated with AI and what is not. But if you are kind of watching this from the side and, or avoiding it completely, it's actually very difficult to find the differences, and the differences can be actually quite bad, and we already enter in a world where we have an alternate version of reality, that these new tools are actually, kind of in a way, helping in building, So it's really important for people to actually understand how they work, what they do, how it looks like, how to assess them, So yeah, I don't think you can just wait, and see.
Well, and I think it's important to reinforce what you said about kind of the proclivity for experimentation and adoption of new tools and the different generations. And so therefore, to me, it seems like the older generations in our industry, because it's obviously our industry is made up of, I don't know, 5 generations, 6 like in firms right now. And so to really be the enablers of that change instead of the, putting the stake in the ground and saying, this is us and we're never changing, right? But to really be the enabler. And it also, to me, really points out this idea of hiring for skill sets, not just people who know how to drive a particular piece of software. We've gone through the era where if you knew how to use Revit, you could get a job here, kind of a thing. And it was all about just operating a single tool or maybe a couple tools. And now we're really seeing a push into a mindset shift of like a skill set of being able to do a lot of different things and bring ideas to the table and be experimenting like that. That, I think that's something that firms should really be looking at to have that effective kind of future generation on their payroll, right? To help them get there.
For sure. for sure. Yeah. And that's
Well,
obviously that's definitely kind of tackling the design side, but this will also have to ultimately affect the construction side as well, which
mhm,
is even kind of farther in the past than architecture at the moment.
mhm.
But it will also change. And I see now, um, I think I'm seeing more evidence of the construction industry also kind of starting to change, which is, I think is promising. Hopefully it's going to kind of enable this new generation, younger generations to actually push for the best ideas, and to explore new things, through kind of a completely different lens. But yeah, we'll have to
Well,
see.
and your firm is proving it, right? Like what you just said, you guys are proving that you can build things that are not conventional, that are highly detailed. And I imagine it's difficult to find contractors willing to do that. But at the same time, there's contractors who want to stand apart from the older generation,
Yeah.
and they're interested in solving these kinds of problems. And so, I mean, it's like you're saying, that there really is another level to this, which is actually realizing these projects beyond what you can imagine and what you can document to what can actually get built.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, um, I think these tools should enable people to realize, that the best ideas they could have. That should be that should be kind of the goal. And I'm not thinking only about, how to kind of model something very quickly or get into kind of the side is really helping across the whole model. So making it cheaper, making it faster to produce, making it work in the current and the future kind of economic environment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I'm hopeful that these models could work. You know, um, I'm also conscious that there will be another kind of parallel route where building kind of shoeboxes will become basically free and almost kind of automatic. But good ideas are always more appealing. And when you talk to clients about kind of enabling the realization of the wildest idea they could have, if it were, for them within the kind of their business model, they will obviously go for it. Everyone will like to have the best possible, product out of their kind of pockets in a way. So, whatever the best thing that you can get, from every single side.
May the best ideas win. Well, Pablo, this has been a great conversation, and I'm going to put a link to your talk that has been posted on the AEC Tech Conference website so people can catch that, because you were able to go, under the hood and kind of show the projects in a more detailed way and the kinds of technologies and tools that you're using, but also I think, some really amazing photography and imagery behind the scenes of like the tile making, for example, and you guys do some really beautiful work, and it gets very detailed. So I want to put a link to that in the show notes so that listeners can hear more. Thanks for taking the time to have this conversation. It's been great.
No, thank you, Evan. Yeah, a pleasure.
If you watched all the way to the end, thank you. That actually means a lot. I have two things I'd ask of you before you go. One, hit subscribe right now if you haven't already. It's totally free. It takes one click, and I'm really trying to get to 1,500 subscribers. We're not there yet, and every single one counts. If this show has been worth your time, that's the easiest thing you can do. Number two, if you want to go further, if you want to support independent coverage of this industry and get ad-free episodes of the podcast, plus my full Leadership Edge newsletter, head over to trxl.co and click the join button. The link is in the show notes. $12 a month, and you'll be one of the people who actually makes this possible. All right, that's a wrap. Subscribe, share it with someone who would get it, and I'll see you in the next one.